Welcome to the Reflection for Learning video series, where we are sharing through our demonstrations that it's still possible to engage yourself, teachers, your students, the learners, in reflective activity in the online learning space. This video focuses on active listening. Active listening is a critical component of reflective practice. If we want to garner insights or perspectives from others, like Brufel would say, use your students' perspectives, draw on your peers' perspectives, we need to be willing to deeply and actively listen. In order to do that, it's actually a skill that we need to practice and develop. And here's an example of an activity of how you can have people practice and develop their active listening skill. Often I would do this in a face-to-face classroom. If I had, say, 60 participants, I just have them sitting as pairs and working through the activity. Today, we're going to have two volunteers who are going to role model the activity for you. And normally, there are several steps to this activity for which we allow 2 minutes. But just to abbreviate the activity, I'm going to allow 1 minute. So some volunteers, I'm looking at my group. My volunteers are going to be Agnes and Anne-Louise. Thank you for your volunteering. And Agnes, you're going to be person 1, Anne-Louise person 2. And person 1, as you see, will have, in this case, a minute to describe an activity. We're currently in a lockdown for COVID, and something that everybody's doing is walking for exercise. So we're going to have Agnes explain about the walk that she took in a minute. Anne-Louise is going to listen, and then they're going to have to recount that story. And Agnes is going to check it for accuracy. So if you're doing this, you'll need a timer. I simply use the one on my phone. And I'm going to ask Agnes to start telling about her walk to Anne-Louise, and I'll start the timer. Go.
Anne-Louise, I went for the most beautiful walk this morning. It's winter and I live in a beautiful area of Sydney that is surrounded by bush. So I went for a walk with my dog Esco, who is a spoodle, through some casuarina forest that's just near my house. And casuarinas are Australian tree that's called a she oak. They have lovely fine needles. And so covering the ground was all the she oak needles. And they're actually quite thin trunks. It's quite a spooky place to walk through because the light is different. And when I walked this morning in my area, there was a little bit of fog. So it was a very magical, slightly spooky atmosphere. And we walked for about half an hour and it was a wonderful start to the day. Am I at a minute?
That's good. That's great. Okay. So let's go to step number 2. And step number 2 is person number 2, Anne-Louise, recounts this description, and she might even want to ask some clarifying questions. So I will time you now, Anne-Louise, and ask you to start with your recount of Agnes's walk. Away you go.
Thank you, Marina, and thank you, Agnes, for your description. I really had a clear picture in my mind of the wonderful winter walk that you took this morning through the bush near your house. And I really appreciated your description of the casuarina and how it's quite distinct for the way in which the needles fall on the ground. And I also thought you really painted an interesting picture of how it was both magical and spooky at the same time, probably complemented by the fog that was in the bush at the time that you walked through it this morning. So I guess one thing that I would like to clarify, if possible, is whether or not being in that setting triggers you to think about something quite different from what you might be thinking about if you were undertaking your day-to-day, I guess, comings and goings at that time.
That's a really good question. And because I have been doing the same walk most mornings as we go.
We're going to stop there because we are abbreviating it for the sake of the video. But I would ask maybe Agnes at this point, just very quickly, to judge. How accurate was that description?
I thought Anne Louise had really, she said some of the words I'd used to describe the walk. She had pictured the scene for herself and recognized the fog and the magic of it and the mood. And I thought the question was a lovely way to extend our conversation.
Thank you.
Which we would do if we had more time.
Yeah, and if you were in a non-short video segment, that's exactly what you would do. You could extend it for that discussion. Okay, this time we're now going to invite Anne Louise to spend a minute describing not her breakfast, but her walk. Away you go, Anne Louise.
So this morning I took a walk on, I guess, what we call our regular path. And it goes parallel to a creek, and then it comes down into a very lovely open park area. And a lot of people use that area, but we tend to go to the places where people are not in that area. And we enjoy seeing birds such as fairy wrens and also red-browed finches. But this morning, to our surprise, we came across two king parrots, which we have never seen in this area. And that was very exciting for us.
Okay, so that was in under a minute. So let's just stop that there. And we will now ask person number one, Agnes, to give a recount of Anne Louise's description of her walk. Away you go, Agnes.
So Anne Louise described her regular walk alongside a creek that goes into an open park space and the birds that you see along the way. And I have to say, I'm quite envious that you see wrens and finches because I don't have a lot of small birds in my area. King parrots are a bit more familiar to me where I am. And so seeing two king parrots who are often quite secretive is a really amazing moment. And I hope you were able to take the time to stop and watch them and enjoy that experience. It's very nice as we take the same regular walks to have that bit of novelty and to think of how much that area changes. So if I were asking a question to follow up, if we were continuing the discussion, I'd ask a bit more about this regular walk and whether it's changed during lockdown. Are more people there? Is it harder to avoid other people than usual?
Thank you, Agnes. How accurate was that, Anne Louise?
Very.
Oh, that was the end of our timing there. Okay. So very?
Yep, very accurate. I felt like Agnes was imagining herself along that walk and what I was seeing.
Now, if you were, in this case, for example, I've got as an example illustration using a theme, a topic, a concept with your students, and they were talking about it. They were defining, the example I've got on the PowerPoint is reflective practice. At the end, you would ask people to then consider, would they change their conceptualization or definition based on the feedback they've got from the person they interacted with. So one more question for Agnes and Anne Louise. How was the experience of listening so carefully?
I think I would say it was more embodied than just listening and being distracted. I was able to think of the senses that Anne Louise was experiencing on the walk and put myself in that position as well. And it was almost like I'd had another walk today as well as my usual walk. I'd had Anne Louise's walk as well.
Nice. Anne Louise?
Yes, in a very similar way, I felt like I was experiencing what Agnes had this morning, and to the point where I knew I was meant to be listening actively, and I was, but I was allowing myself to be carried away through that active listening, which then, becomes a little bit difficult when you're trying to recite what it is you heard because you're so caught up in the story, you forget about having to repeat the description. But I really appreciated it, and it forced me to really picture what it was she experienced and think about it through various senses.
Thank you. So this activity can be very enjoyable as people interact with each other and have those conversations, but at the same time, they are developing those important skills. The active listening activity is elaborated and supported by scholarship in our practice guide, which is freely available for everybody by downloading. If you go ahead and try active listening with colleagues, students, anybody, and you'd like to give us some feedback, if you look on the screen, you will see the Gmail account where you can give us that feedback, reflection4lc for the Learning Circle @gmail.com. So thank you for viewing this video and have fun with reflection.